Professor Suresh. I will not take too much time, which will be an injustice to his celebrated CV. Professor Suresh is a Dean of Mechanical Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And he has created enormous amount of volume of scientists and researchers who are teaching, who are contributing to the society in various different ways through his academic body of work. And there are several startups company also created from his research outputs. And I'm really glad that some of us are also here. I have some personal thanks to him because I started my whole research with him. So learning and getting freedom from the kind of professorship he has been doing in the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and even before that at the University of Pennsylvania, it's really incredible. So I'll look up to him to be like him. So I think one of the things very important came many times is that that how to really write things properly. Although we come up with very interesting new ideas, but Suresh has been very vocal about how to really write well, and we're really privileged to have him today. And if we can see that some of the mentalities can be developed from his talk, that would be great. Unfortunately, due to technical problems, the YouTube live could not happen. We had a registration of over 60 people today, but unfortunately, I don't see them also here. So, without further ado, I'll just give the floor to Suresh. Thank you, Suresh, for waiting for so long.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. So, I mean, no problem about waiting. I was able to listen to your talk. I had meetings until 5:30, so I would have missed otherwise. So, no problem at all. And I just want to know that the people who are in this meeting, what I'm going to talk about is not for these people. So there are others who are there that you said registered. This is not for seasoned researchers, right? So
no, I think people do. I mean, people did follow your abstract, and there was a form, so I could recognize that there are some people from IITs. Guwahati, for example, we got quite a few registrations. I don't know their background. I don't know the name by name, of course. But I think there are most.
But there are some people who are not seasoned researchers, right? I mean, for students especially, what I have prepared.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
There may be a few.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Quite a few actually.
Right. Thank you for the kind introduction, and nice meeting all of you. I wish I had spent more time in this meeting had I not had other meetings today. So can I share my screen, Siddharth?
Yes, you have the privilege, I think.
Yeah. Only host all participants who can share.
You are a co-host.
Okay, but who can share? Advanced sharing options. No, it's not. When I click there, it's not letting me share. It says only host all participants. Okay, only. I mean, I don't know.
You should be a co-host, but I made you a host now as well. So
okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. Now I can share.
I believe
that you see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. What I have to discuss today is something that has been written by many people many times, and every time we interact with students or novice researchers, it is worth talking about it again. So I've just put a subtitle saying that writing well is everybody's aspiration, but we should be practical about it. So I put the subtitle, A Pragmatic Approach. And I thank this group led by Siddharth and others for giving me this opportunity, because many times our own students and others, when they are writing for the first time, they need a lot of help. So the writing advice, I said, is aplenty. You can find it in many places. And I myself have a long list of articles written by others on how to write. And basically, my own thing that I would start off is we should write only when we have something worthy of sharing and making archival. This is easier said than done, because this should be the spirit of writing a research paper, that only when you have something worthy. But then how do you judge? And if you don't have papers, people today might consider that you are not productive. So there are all these issues, I would say more like social issues in research, when you have to write publications. So I don't know this particular thing that I'm writing is even relevant. So you just need to write when you have something rather than something good. So that's how we go. But then we still need to keep in mind that writing something that is not worthy of archival material is probably not a good idea to write. And this is also something that is easier said than done, because these indices are all around us. In fact, whenever we introduce somebody, sometimes we mention their H index or I index or whatever, right? So, and then when we think about journals, again, we think about impact factors. Many journals on their websites show impact factors. So we cannot escape the scientometric indices. But then it's a good idea, again, idealistic way to say that we should not pander to those things. So again, we need to write when you have something really good to write. This is all idealism. When it comes to choosing a journal, again, I have some idealistic things to start with, and then I'll move on to pragmatic thing. So we should publish in journals from which you learn and those you respect, right? I can start there, but then there are so many journals, people just want to publish somewhere. When you have some work done and you have prepared a manuscript, you want to make sure that that manuscript gets published somewhere. But then idealistically, ideally we should publish in journals that will be read by people who do similar work that you do. And that means that you'll be reading some journals regularly, you try to publish there. So if you want to publish in journals of higher quality than what you are reading, that's a good aspiration. But publishing in journals that you don't respect is probably not a good idea. And of course, when you write papers, you have to use the right kind of language that communicates with the readers of that field. So when you do interdisciplinary work, that becomes difficult because you come from one field and now you have learned another one and working at the interface of two disciplines. When you submit a paper to the other community, it's always a challenge because they don't talk the same language as you do. So that's something we need to keep in mind. But apart from that, really practical advice at the end that I have put here is we should just pay attention to writing. When we pay attention, I think writing will come out well. This is not something I'm saying. Many people have written on how to write, always say this. You just have to desire to write well and it will come out well. And you have to spend time as well. So Siddharth was actually talking about ethics of writing. This is known to everyone. Plagiarism is not something that one should engage in. Whatever we write, it should be in our own words, in our own sentences, our own hard work, our own sweat, blood, and tears. I just want to show a cartoon that actually Siddharth had drawn, I guess 10 years ago or more, 2011 it shows, for an IAC desk calendar. So it just reads a secretary asking her boss because they wanted to post a plagiarism policy on the website. So we had decided to post a plagiarism policy on a website. What goes there? Then the person who is really busy says that, oh, that's very simple. Just take 4 sentences from there, 2 from here, 3 from there, and make it up. Right? They're writing a plagiarism policy, but then we don't pay attention sometimes. And if we actually really see the etymology of the word plagiarism, which is in small print at the bottom, it is actually about kidnapping. Right? The Latin root plagiaris and Greek root plagian, they both mean kidnapping. So you're basically kidnapping somebody else's something, a child or whoever, right? And then passing it off as your own. That is basically plagiarism. So if you understand that, I think then it will not happen. But sometimes without knowing, people probably do this. Anyway, I want to get it out of the way. Then writing is not easy. So this is something that Gustave Flaubert had said, a famous French writer. What a heavy oar the pen is, and what a strong current ideas are to row in. If a eminent author like Flaubert says this, then we can think about the researchers. We are not even professional writers. We just want to write about our research. So we can see how difficult it will be for us. So what I have done over a long period of time is to collect articles that accomplished people have written on how to write a paper. So this list is actually, I have not updated. I have a long list of articles that I have collected. So there is one that I would start with today, how to write a paper. There is a long paper that Professor Mike Ashby, who is a retired professor from University of Cambridge, has written. And one other person has written just a page, but there is a wealth of information. And one of my colleagues, Professor Ananthasuresh, is now at IIT Kanpur, he even wrote with this title, how to write a passable technical paper, not a good or great, just something that passes the muster, right? And then Professor Centuria, who was a professor at MIT, who wrote about keeping reviewers in mind, how to avoid the reviewers' acts. Because whenever we send a paper, we always worry about our first readers who are reviewers. So he wrote a few list of a few things that you have to keep in mind so that you don't come under the axe of the reviewers. And Professor George Whitesides, who is at Harvard University, wrote, so basically anybody who has written a lot of papers and has worked with students who are usually inexperienced in writing would end up writing one of these papers, how to write a paper. Because this is something we tell our students. That's why I asked at the beginning today, it is not for the seasoned researchers, what I'm presenting now. It's for people who are beginning to write. So heeding the advice is something that's very important. These articles that I have, I also read them and reread them many times. And Professor Ashby offers this elaborate advice, actually. And he says, you should prepare yourself well before you write. This is also something that many people also say. But then we're always in a hurry to write. And then we write and then kind of revise it later. But if you actually prepare yourself well, then it would come out much better. And you have to give enough time. So you have to have time to do your work and then enough time to write. That doesn't mean that if you give yourself a lot of time, automatically good writing will come. So it's a craft, actually. So before you even develop your first draft, you may have to think a lot and write it and then revise it. So since I said pragmatic advice, I just switched to the articles themselves. I have a long list of articles here. Let me start. Obviously, I cannot go through all of them, but you can find these papers. Or if you don't have, I can give you some of them which are in public domain. For example, this Professor Ashby's article is in public domain. You have access to it. If you write how to write a paper in Google and search Mike Ashby, you'll find it. This is 47 pages on how to write a paper. And he starts off with like a blank sheet and thinking about having a cup of coffee there and then writing. He says that, it's something that you have to put in time and put in a lot of thought to get it right. So obviously we cannot go through all this. I just show the table of contents. So he says you have to design your paper. So that's the spirit with which he wants us to write. So you are going to produce a piece of art, a design. And then he talks about the market, right? It's also business language because you're writing a paper to showcase your work. So you have to think of your market. Who are your readers? And then, of course, he says concept sheet you should have and brainstorm yourself, or if you have co-authors with them. And then he talks about in design language, like what we call embodiment design, the first draft. And then the details, grammar, spelling, punctuation, style, And then he gives, of course, references that you write. And then appendices also. It's a very long paper, but very well done. So I would recommend that you read it if you have not already come across this paper. And second one that I have is what Professor George Whitesides has written for his own group. In fact, in the title, he makes it very clear, Whitesides group writing a paper, right? So, and then he defines what scientific paper, but what I like, or I want to highlight here is that what he says, all writing that I do, papers, reports, proposals, and of course, slides for seminars, I do from outlines. And he urges us to learn how to use them as well. How do you write an outline? How do you use it to write? This is a very eminent researcher, very prolific as well. And he saying this should give us a lot of hints about how we should approach writing. And then, of course, he gives his own views on how to write paper and gives examples also. Of course, they are from his own field, chemistry and biomems and so forth. But you can take them not in that context, but a general context and look at this. Okay, this is another one. So here is one more. This is from someone who is in Boston, is a company, Boston Dynamics. So it was written, long time ago. I would have noticed people who write such papers most often revise them later. So that means that they are following their own advice. When you write for the first time, it may not be the best form. You have to revise and rewrite. So they do practice that. Professor Ashby is also, there are several editions of that paper on how to write a paper. That's something we should remember. And his thing is, Mark Rybert, he says, you must want to produce good writing. It should start with a desire. And you should also believe you can produce good writing. Sometimes one of my students actually joked with me that they would not spend a lot of time because I would anyway correct it. So that's not a good way to think about it. You should think that the first draft that you give to your professor or your whoever lead author, you should be thinking that there won't be any revisions because you have spent so much time on it. You should believe that you can produce good writing yourself. Of course, he moves on to give his own advice. And this is something that we should remember. Good writing is bad writing that was rewritten. It's like people telling you that success is a failure that succeeds eventually, right? So everybody, when they write for the first time, it won't be of the best quality. Your work may be of very good quality. You are writing the first draft. If you are not a seasoned writer, it won't be in best form to begin with. So you have to revise and rewrite a few times, iterate on it. And everybody has some advice to give you. Like he says, spill the beans fast. And this is something that other people who have written also say, because sometimes we have very little to say, but then we want to write a paper. So we put in some boilerplate statements, a long introduction, and something that is not necessary to convey the point you want. He says, these are not murder mysteries. Research papers are not murder mysteries. You should not make it like who has done it, right? Who done it? It's not of that kind. You should actually get to the point right away. And in fact, he says, spill the beans in the title, spill the beans in the abstract, spill the beans introduction, and spill the beans in the body. Saying that, he's telling you that you should not hide what you want to say so that you build the suspense. Just say it straight. And that always works well because researchers have become very busy right now, right? They have lots of things to do. They have to write grant proposal, they have to do research, they have to supervise. And people who are your first readers, who are referees, are very busy people. They will not have a lot of time to spend on your paper. If they don't understand what you're writing very easily, then they will not be very favorable to what you are going to actually say in the paper. So this is a very good piece of advice. And he also gives an example. It's very common for us to say in this paper, I will give you a formula for good writing or something like that. But what formula for what purpose? right? So that is the kind of thing. It's not like you are hiding anything, but your way of writing may be hiding and not letting the reader know quickly what the paper is all about. So I have another one here. This is how to write a passable technical paper, right? So here also is the same thing, and then he also defines, strategy defines what is a passable paper. Again, he says like a story, and the same thing. It's not a murder mystery. It's not like he has read what Mark Rybert has written. So everybody comes up with the similar ideas, right? So you want to write your message in a very straight way. Let's see. Okay, I think this is something. It's hiding something here. I have to move. Okay. Yeah. Here is another one. This is Professor Steve Centurias that I like a lot because it's very practical, keeping the reviewer in mind. So the way papers are written now, after your paper is read by 3 or 4 or 2, 3, 4 reviewers, depends on the journal, read it, it's published. How many people read it afterwards? That's a big question, because it's not an exaggeration to say that people probably read less than what they write today, right? But that's not the ideal situation. But your reviewers are your first readers, and sometimes probably last readers also. Okay, he gives very good advice there. And one thing to remember, right, what he says here, almost nothing is new. So you've done the work, it's original work, that's why I want to write about. But then there is always a lot of work done before, and you may have given a little twist to it, or maybe a new finding. But very rarely, for the average researcher, you would find something really great. So when you write it, you have to be careful that there are a lot of people, like Newton had said, standing on the shoulders of giants, you could see farther, right? So it applies to other people a lot more. So we have to be very humble in the way we write. We should not claim a lot of things. And then he talks about this believability index. Whenever we have things, we have maybe 2 or 3 things that we want to convey, but then we want to say more so that our package looks attractive. That's a human tendency, and we fall for it. He says, even if you do that, you have to have believability index assigned to the things you want to say, and first present the ones you think are most believable, and then slowly put in the other things that you anyway want to put, if you want to put. Okay. And he also gives, gambling words. He gives examples of what are gambling words, and don't be a long fellow. That is, don't use too many words, and don't pull rabbits out of hats. Sometimes you're involved in your work so much that you don't realize that you're skipping some steps, especially a long derivation or an experimental work where you have done several things, but you skip all those details and just present your facts, which might appear to the reader that you are pulling rabbits out of hats. Okay. And he also gives a practical advice: mine all the gold. So you have done the work. You should know what is the merit of what you have done, what are the good bits of what you have done, and convey all of them in this decreasing order of believability. Okay. And then, of course, is there a question? Yeah. And he also says, remember, reviewers are inarticulate and authors are paranoid. So the first time you write a paper, or any time you write a paper, when you get reviews back, you hold your breath. What did they say? If it is accepted or not accepted, either way, how did reviewers react? And when you read them, your first impression would be that reviewers didn't understand my paper. They didn't read my paper. That's not true, because they're all professionals. Researchers, peer review, it's a very important aspect of research publications today. So, but when they say it, you don't understand exactly what they're saying. So you think that reviewers are inarticulate. And of course, you are paranoid. And he gives this practical advice. I suggest that you read this as well. And then there is this practical advice. That's what I would like to move to. I'll come to this. Let me switch to my presentation now. This, there is something that's blocking my window. I hope it's not blocking your window. Yeah. So logical flow is very important when we start to write a paper. Sometimes we start writing in the chronological order in which the work was done. That's probably not the best way. You may have started something and then that it another and so forth. You don't have to write exactly that way. You assimilate everything that you have done and try to find a logical flow to your paper. Find a logical flow of presenting your ideas. And this is actually a very hard thing that I find personally, because you would have done work over several months or sometimes even a couple of years when you want to write it. And you have to think in what way, if you present, it will be effectively communicated to the reader. So you have to imagine a reader who does not know your work, does not know the details of your work. You have to put yourself in reader's shoes and then start writing. And this is what Ashby, Professor Ashby says in his thing. You should first take a paper, literally paper, not writing on a computer, and start writing your ideas with a pen. Then you would know. And this is what George Whiteside also says, and many people say. First, you have to have an outline of what you want to do so that the logical flow comes there. And then being concise is very important. That's why I put it in only 2 words, be concise. And you have to say all that you want to say in as few words as possible. Like poetry, right? Because poets convey a lot of thought, a lot of things in very few words, unlike prose. But papers are not written like poetry. But in spirit, they should be written like poetry. So that you are saying that in very few words so people understand. And I come across some papers written by Maxwell and Rankin and these people. Rankin had a marvelous paper that had only 4 sentences, and that led to the whole field of what's called a graphic statics method and what today modern thing we call topology optimization. Just 4 sentences, right? Of course, we cannot write like Rankin, but we should reduce the number of words that we use. And of course, if you want to know how the people try to say that what you mean to say is not saying what you meant. So it's a play of words in Alice in Wonderland's. You should read, it's like I see what I eat is not the same as I eat what I see. I like what I get is not the same as I get what I like, right? So this is something that we want to say. Say what you mean is not equivalent to meaning what you say. So you have to really watch your words. So that's why one has to put in as much thought in writing as you put in doing the work. And I tell my students most of the time to play this game of Jenga. So you have a lot of wooden pieces, which 90 degrees turn that way, this way, and the tower is there. You start removing. It's a party game. You start removing until the tower collapses. In a similar way, when you write your first draft, you think of this as a lot of wooden blocks stacked like this and start removing so that the tower does not collapse. So you have done that, then you have used as few words as possible, or as few sentences as possible, as few figures as possible, as few tables as possible. The paper should be self-contained for sure, so that somebody can repeat your thing, but then you don't have to put unnecessary stuff. There was a time when the editorial board of a journal, which was trying to split because there were a lot of papers and journal was growing at a fast pace with many papers submitted. They wanted to split into 2 sub areas. At that time, the editor-in-chief had told all of us that, well, let us restrict the number of pages to 8. And we thought in this era of the soft copies of the journals, what sense does it make if you're not printing too many copies, printed copies? But then he told all of us that you read the old papers. They were very short, and there was a lot more content on the average in those old papers in, let's say, 50s, 60s, 70s, or even 80s, before word processing came along. So just now, now we have a lot of word processing. Yeah, sorry for that interruption. So sometimes we don't think when we write. For example, look at this sentence. If the algorithm does not converge in 5 iterations, the parameters are reset. What you mean is that it's not like you don't know when your algorithm converge or does not converge. And your algorithm does not converge, right? There may be something, but maybe you mean when the algorithm does not converge rather than if the algorithm does not converge, right? So you have to be careful about how somebody would interpret. It may be sometimes if is to be used, sometimes when to be used. You have to use that logic to see which word is appropriate. And a lot of resources are there today. In fact, the abstract I had sent to Siddharth, I just put it in this application called Philbot. When I say rephrase, it actually rephrased my own abstract. So I spent some time in writing this little abstract that I had sent to Siddharth for this talk. And when I put this rephrase, what they actually did this, which I have put actually 2 versions of it. Both of them are very good. I mean, I wish I did this, but then I sent my own thing, not their rephrased one. But, if you do it a few times, whatever little thing that you write, you put into these, and then they automatically rewrite. These things are very clever now. And then you see, why did they change something to whatever you wrote? They change it back to something else. So then you think, okay, is that thing? Then you can make that change. There are a lot of tools available, and there are a lot of courses, but then you have to heed that advice. You have to take that. And in fact, I set some parameters in this rephrasing thing, and it actually gives me several versions of my own abstract. And it's important, that you learn by doing these things. And let me come to these details now. These again, like I said, my whole talk is for people who are beginners to writing papers. Those who have written a few papers don't need this talk at all. We don't follow even simple things now about figures. Figures should be your own. You cannot just take figures from somewhere and put it, because that also amounts to plagiarism. Sometimes there's also self-plagiarism. That is, you're not supposed to use figures that you have used in your published papers. You have to take permission. That all becomes very cumbersome. So that means that you have a figure that you want to use again and again, which also is not a good thing. So you have to change your figure. So figure should be your own, or you have to adapt someone else's figure or your own figure that is published. But if you do that, cite the original source and make sure that the figure is substantially different. So that's something that's we should remember. And figure should have good resolution. These days, the problem is not resolution. We have high resolution pictures. The file size becomes very large. And you should think about that as well. You can reduce the file size in Word if you go to info, that actually condenses the file size. So you can do all that is there. Use the technology. You have high resolution for screen as well as a print. At the same time, you cannot have too large a file size. And axis labels and markings in the graphs and everything should all be legible. So as a youngster, you probably have better vision than older people who read it. So you have to keep them in mind to make sure that all fonts are large enough. This is all practical things. And one would think that everybody knows, but it's not often practiced. And in grammar and the way you write, there is, again, I'm not an expert in English language, but what I've seen is that sometimes this parallelism will be lacking. So you say, we first present the problem and then the solution is discussed. One is in active sentence, other is in active voice, other is in passive voice. You should probably say, we first present the problem and then discuss the solution. So we have to pay attention, that's all. So there are a lot of things like this. And passive and active voice, again, people are divided in this, which is better. Most people today recommend active voice. But then if you overuse active voice, old-fashioned people will get annoyed. So you should have a balance. And we always say, don't say, I did this, you did that. You always include the reader and then say, we discuss the theorem and the proof. Right? That's something we need to remember when, well, actually, if you read papers, not only to understand the content, but also to learn how those authors have written, then you learn a lot. Then nobody needs to tell you what to write and how to write. You will learn yourself. And Simple things like when do you use which and when you use that. And when do you put comma, when do you not put comma. Fortunately today, word processors like Word, for example, would put a little squiggly line. They have actually blue line, green line, red line now for different things, spelling and grammar and rephrasing. There is a lot of help that is coming as you write. And we should not ignore. We should actually see why there is a red underline or a green or a blue one. Okay, and you will learn all this. You don't have to take a grammar class. If you just pay attention, you will learn all these nuances. And tables, you have to format tables properly because tables contain important information, your data or your results. So if you don't format, people cannot absorb what you have very easily because they'll have mostly numbers. So you should do that. And if you're an engineer, ASME, IEEE, they all have formats. If you're a scientist, your journals have formats. Follow them strictly. And you have to observe these formats in good journals. When you read, if you observe, again, not only the research content of that paper, how they have formatted tables and figures and everything, you would become a better paper writer. And simple, the table caption should be at the top, figure caption should be at the bottom of the figure. You can observe all of those things. So that's about captions, where they should be. Again, a lot of, I would say, practical advice. This is what I used to tell my students. I still tell them, whenever you have symbols, our tendency is we would have the Times New Roman font and just make it italics and make it a symbol. That has a problem. You know, it's better to have all symbols using either equation editor or math type or whatever you use. Every symbol, let it be in that format rather than text at the font. Because if you suddenly change the font, things may become bigger, smaller, becomes an ISO. And you should follow lowercase letters for scalars, scalar quantities, lowercase bold for vectors, uppercase bold for matrices and tensors and so forth. So you should follow all these. Again, you have to observe when you read papers, how they are written. Because when you are reading a paper that has a lot of equations, if you don't follow this, people will get confused, which is a scalar, which is a vector, which is a matrix, which is a tensor, and all of that will confusion be avoided if you do this. In fact, if you see old papers, they always used to have notation at the beginning of the paper. But now many journals have gone out of that habit. And parentheses also, you have to follow the order. Everything should be in proper order. Citing equations, figures, and tables, there are simple things like you don't refer to an equation before it appears. And figures or tables, you should be in the order. So you cannot refer to figure 2 and then figure 4 and then figure 3. So all the order, these are all simple things. It's all common sense, but first time you write it, you think that they're not important because you're so excited about whatever work you have done in conveying in that enthusiasm for conveying that you would not pay attention to all of these things, and then reviewers don't pay attention to what you wanted to convey, and then they may have very harsh comments. So to avoid all that, spend time to write everything properly. And formatting is a good idea. As and when you're writing, you should just format the journal's format. So that way it will actually be good. You actually can visualize how your paper looks like, right? Of course, different journals have different ways of accepting the thing. Some people just take the PDF in the format of the eventual, even though it's not reviewed, it's not accepted yet. Sometimes people just take the flowing text and figures at the end. Whatever it is, whatever you're going to submit, let that be separate. But you try to format your paper in that journal that where you are submitting and see how your paper looks like. That way you also feel that, okay, my paper is going to, you start believing that your paper will get accepted, that positive thinking is good. And like I'm saying, underlining that will be there in Word or whatever, just pay attention and you will learn punctuation and grammar and spelling as you write. And the references, sometimes, especially in India, I mean, we mostly go by our first name rather than last names. So we get confused how to write. So most often we should use the last names. And people also don't pay attention to how et al. Should be written. So et al. Dot. This is a contraction of alia. Et is and others alia. And alia is shortened to AL dot. That's like a abbreviation. Sometimes you don't distinguish between acronyms and abbreviations. And etal is something that I see that they put dot both places or don't put after al. That is et without al without dots or et dot al dot. So all those things, are important. Of course, if you notice in the paper that you're reading, you would not be making all these mistakes. And when it comes to, especially, I hope most of the students who are watching this are Indians who know Hindi that I put here. Sometimes technical writing is a mixture of English and our native tongue. And that is something that we need to avoid. And it is something that, in our conversations, like we said, Jab, we met. And we actually write like that. So we try to mix our thing, especially when it comes to tense, because in some of the Indian languages, in Hindi, the singular and plural have the same word, pool, right? So when you write in English, you have to pay attention to the tense. And I've seen several times, in spite of my close scrutiny of the papers we submit, there'll be one or two slips that students write. They don't keep the tense properly. So we have to make sure that we follow all the rules of grammar. And of course, spelling, right? Because Word auto-corrects spellings, but then that also is sometimes problematic because auto-correction also might lead to. So it's you have to write your paper before you submit, take a gap of several hours, and then read your paper, and then catch every little thing. Okay. And of course, there is punctuation, which is something that we don't pay attention to unless somebody points out. There is a beautiful book. The book is already 20 years or older than that, by Lynn Truss, Eat, Shoots, and Leaves. And it's a very entertaining book. And some of you might have already read it, but I would say you read it, but just for entertainment, because punctuation is explained very well there. And I learned by reading this book that there is something called an apostrophe protection society, because people don't know where to put an apostrophe, where to put a hyphen. Right here, you see bananas for sale. And this book comes with punctuation kit. So whenever you say notice board in different sizes, it gives an apostrophes and commas and full stops to correct. And it's a good habit. In fact, when I read a newspaper or a magazine, if I have a pen in my hand, I start correcting. So if you start that habit of looking around and then see where things are wrong, then you would not make mistakes when you write. Hyphenation is a very important one. Sometimes, for example, non-linear is such a common thing now. You can put non-linear, but something is used over a long period of time, heavily used, then you don't need to hyphenate. But non-negative needs hyphen. Non-singular, if you start using a lot of time, people after language changes. So you have to know when to put a hyphen, when not to put a hyphen. So hyphen apostrophes are something that, especially hyphen, long dash, colon, people don't know how to use it. You spend some time, how to use those punctuation marks will be really useful. So now, I mean, I'll just, Siddharth, how much time do we have?
So you were so thick. Yeah, I've been more or less 2 minutes or so.
Okay, sure. So I just point out
if you consider the offset, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Just consider the offset, sorry. But you can go on. I mean, I don't have any problem with others if they're interested.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I think I'll wrap up. So there is this San Francisco edit. There are a lot of companies like this. This is something I follow. That's why I'm sharing with you. That they actually offer help in writing, and they keep sending articles because I've subscribed to their thing. They talk about how to write an effective title for your paper. So you think title is something that's not there. So look at how much they have said about the title itself, right? How to write a title and how to write an abstract. And so this is something that I like. This is a one-page thing written by Dr. Bill Trimmer a long time ago. Like I said, I collect these things. The abstract, introduction, and conclusion seem to be 3 places requiring identical information. He says that is not true. You have to understand the difference between an abstract, introduction to your paper, and also conclusion. And he says the abstract will be read by people deciding if they want to read your article. That's when abstract is there. It's like a summary of your paper. Or it's actually different from a summary also in a way, right? It's basically your chance to tell the prospective reader what your paper is about. That's an abstract. And then if you say introduction is like a roadmap, Bill Trimmer says. After reading the introduction, the reader should be able to scan the article and pick out the important facts. After, what is it then, a conclusion? After reading your whole article, readers may still not grasp the significance, so you reinforce it with the conclusion. The conclusion is your chance to put the article in perspective. Many times we write conclusion by just collecting a few sentences that summarize your work, the work done. Work done, you say you did that, you did this, that is not necessarily a conclusion. Conclusion of your work should be written there. That's a difficult part in the thesis also. People put whatever they have done like a summary. That's not necessarily a conclusion. What's the conclusion of your work? So you have to pay attention to that. And the best thing is to look at good papers. Here I have something I really like, a paper written by Kuhlman and Baker. So it's only 4 sentences, they're long sentences, but look at the way they write. They start with a question. How large is the volume of sequence space that is compared with a given protein structure? So you know the motivation and what exactly they're focusing on. Just in 4 sentences, they convey, and 164 words. Many times students ask the first time, how long should my paper be? Some journals say that you cannot write abstract more than 200 words. That looks very restrictive. Actually, it is not. If a journal says that word limit is very strict, and it is so today because online submission, they will provide a box where you need to put abstract. If it is more than a certain number of words, they will not let you go further. That's always a good thing because whatever you want to say can be said in very few words. And it just goes on. And finally, this San Francisco edit also gives you a checklist. And most of the people who have written about how to write a paper, they actually give this checklist. You should do that. If you take your writing seriously, you would do all this, not just hurriedly writing your paper. Okay, so I'll just end now. Just to say the main points, I would start with what I said. Write only when you have something good, and try not to pander to the indices, and choose a journal based on your familiarity, which journals you read and which journals you learn from, and publish there. So you know your community, you are in that. But of course, in interdisciplinary work, if you do, sometimes you have to go outside of your own field, and that actually causes problems. Then you have to pay more attention to that journal, what articles are published, and do that. So you have to write language. And finally, you just need to pay attention and take all the advice. So I'm not saying I'm an expert writing. My papers still get rejected. So that's maybe because of writing, maybe because of work that are not there. So rejection is something, a part of researchers' career. So if all papers that we write get accepted, then that's not a good thing either, because many journals take pride in their accepting percentage. They don't accept, let's say, 30%, more than 30% of the articles that are submitted, right? So the chances are when you publish a paper, it may not always get accepted. So if you take care of, if you do good work and you pay enough attention to writing, then the chances of getting the paper accepted will be higher. Okay, I'll stop there. And if anybody has any questions or advice to give me, then I'll be happy to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ananthasuresh, for this amazing talk. I remember when we started having this discussion that how we should design these talk. I remember you said that there is already a lot done in this area, but I still feel that the presentation you gave is still very unique. So I feel that it's a lot of new learning for some of the members. I see that very few are left now, but still, please ask questions to both the speakers, Professor Ananthasuresh and Professor Soni, for some time. But since Samit is not there now, I see, I will take those questions for Professor Soni also. So first, let's finish with Professor Ananthasuresh, and then we will go to Professor Soni. So if any of you have some questions for Professor Ananthasuresh, please mention, go ahead, don't hesitate.
Or advice, I'll put it both. So, but one can never be a perfect writer. Right.
Yeah, Pranav, go ahead. You're raising your hand. You can unmute yourself and ask questions.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for such a brilliant lecture. I'm currently pursuing my dissertation from UP Jindal University, and I wanted to know that is there a possibility of scratching out a well thought paper from the readings that I'm doing for my dissertation purpose? Because having to read extensively on a specific topic, it is a desire to pull out some valuable information and convert it into a good paper.
So, I mean, let me see if I understood your question right. Are you trying to write a thesis or a review paper now?
So currently I'm writing my master's dissertation. I intend to write a paper on similar lines on what I have read. So because I cannot cover all the themes that I have read, so there are some set themes that have attracted my attention and I would like to delve into them further. So how do I navigate my way around that without getting much distracted from my main job, which is to write a quality work of master's thesis?
So, I mean, if you want to write about the work that others have written, that will be considered a review paper, right? So you're going to write about the work that you have done as opposed to writing a review paper. Review paper is fine. Again, that also will be reviewed. So are you planning to write a review paper or a paper on the work that you have done?
Sir, a paper on the work that I have done.
Okay. Then whatever, I cited a lot of articles, right? Any of them will give you the right kind of advice as how to write. So first you have to jot down the new things that you want to convey to the community, research community, your community. And that will be the starting point. Okay, we don't, if it is not a review paper, we don't write what others have written already. Right? There'll be some background that you would review, relevant work you have to, because like Steve Centuria said, almost nothing is new. So you would have started somewhere and made a progress, made little progress beyond that, or maybe a lot of progress. Then you have to start where you started, cite that work, and then write about your own work. Does that make sense?
Perfect, sir. Thank you so much. And just a short comment. The idea that I really liked a lot was Sitzer's cartoon, because we have often read and discussed about plagiarism, but to see it in that perspective really emphasize the importance of avoiding plagiarism at all costs.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Pranav, for the question. And is there any other questions? While others are thinking some questions, maybe I can ask some question which I often see while doing this open academic research activity. We always get students who are definitely not seasoned. So they are coming with a lot of ideas, and I can see myself 12 years, 15 years ago. And there is a lot of desire to contribute to the community. So what I felt, I think Pranav also said that to some extent, but I often find that question, that being distracted. So I think Suresh, if you that they get to see a lot of papers and they are getting distracted. So I think how to navigate to a particular direction, which is obviously that the interest what we have, but I think maybe some pointers you have. I think distraction is a big issue for our coming generation because so many interesting research and science and technology are taking place. So they are also getting distracted that which field I should choose. And I think this is a question in between choosing their field of research as well as writing. Even if they have done the short project or long project and they want to write, still back in their mind, they have this big pile of papers. So is there anything on that side you have?
Yeah, I think it's definitely useful to be curious about whatever is being done in your research field and use the word distraction, right? So you read a paper and you want to work on that, and then before you do that, you find another paper that is more exciting and to work on that. Well, such some temptations are very common in life. Just like you know how to choose what you really need rather than what you like at that moment, I think it will be fine. Because we always have, these days, actually, some of the biology colleagues that I have here, jokingly, they told me that they are afraid to read the materials and methods sections of some of the, good papers, because you don't necessarily have such equipment with you, right? We have constraints. So whatever you read may not be suitable for you to do practically within your constraints. So I think if Pranav, who asked the question, if he has not done the work and he wants to do a master's dissertation or is looking for a topic, then I think you have to basically look at what your advisor would tell you, because they have more experience and they would also give you practical advice, what is possible to do in reasonable period of time, because you have the rest of your career to do what you want to do at that moment, whatever is possible, and you would do that. And if you're a researcher, yeah, of course, it's a good habit to read all the work that is published in the journals that you regularly read, and some of them will appeal to you and you want to work on that. So tomorrow, if you get something else and you're more attracted towards that, probably day after tomorrow will be another one that you like more. That's endless, right? So we have to basically assimilate whatever information that you are gathering by reading papers and decide which ones are suitable for you to make a contribution, right? So again, I don't know whether I'm answering your question directly, but it is more of wanting to do versus being able to do. So you have to basically try to balance between the two. And what you will be able to do is probably better criterion than what you want to do, because what you want to do may be many things, right? And again, if you look at the rate at which papers are being published in any particular field, it's mind-boggling, right? So I would say, again, I'm always tending towards giving idealistic advice. I would say, take the less trodden road, quoting Robert Frost, and that will make all the difference. Working in a crowded field is probably not a good idea, especially today, because there are so many researchers. All of them are very smart, we have to assume, right? And they're all probably better equipped than you are in terms of infrastructure or abilities or whatever, right? So taking the less traveled road will probably be better. That way, all the information you read by reading, okay, will probably point to a thing, oh, this is where a lot of people are not going towards. Let me go there. That's a risk, but I think the reward will also be high.
Any other questions? Sure,
Yeah.
Varsha.
I think you
have
muted
to
Varsha.
Varsha.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, sir. I'm Dr. Varsha. So I was working as a former assistant professor in Annamala University Health Science Department. So this is just a query asking since when students write, specifically the postgraduate students start writing papers, they do not know where to start and how to go about. So I often get a lot of queries, ma'am, how do I write? So how do I read and come up to a conclusion to form let's say a small brief paragraph about an introduction? So which all finally ends up to it should not be plagiarized. So can you just name few plagiarism tools which provide certificate which specifically tells there is so much percentage of plagiarisms? Because if I'm not wrong, most of the South Indian health science university do ask for a plagiarism certificate while they write their dissertation, specifically off late. So anything that students can use in handy, which they themselves after they write, they can analyze and come to a conclusion that this is the way it is, and it's been, this is the percentage of plagiarism, and it can be, reverted or probably made less precise to be copied, and they can write in their own words. So some tools which provide certificate, because I do know tools which is easily accessible, and but it does not provide a certificate. So anything that you know of, sir?
Okay, there are two things here. If where you are submitting your writing, if that requires, that organization, institution requires a certificate, then you can use such plagiarism checking software. Turnitin is what IASC uses, our institution uses, and we have license for that. Any student, anybody can use it. But when it comes to writing, you should make sure that you don't take anybody's words or sentences or paragraphs. If you follow that discipline, then you don't need a plagiarism tool yourself. If somebody wants it, you can present by running through that Turnitin or some other software, but you should not be needing a software to tell you that you have not plagiarized, right? So that's probably what I will tell, you can tell your students also that
Yes, sir.
if you are disciplined enough not to take material from anywhere, that is, you try to phrase your own sentences using your own words, then no other piece, it is very unlikely that somebody would write exactly the way you did. If that happens, then it'll be like a miracle, right? So everybody phrases their words in a different way, because first of all, your work is original, you're writing now, and if reports, students term papers and other things also come under writing. So at that time, if you read everything, close them, and then write, then you would not be taking sentences or anything from other source. If you have to absolutely do it, you cite the thing and put in a italics or a different font or whatever and make it stand out so that reader will not get impression that it is yours.
Yes.
Right? So
yes,
if you follow the discipline, I think you should be fine. Plagiarism is not something that the moment we say something is a crime, we get scared, right? Thinking about it, right? Am I committing a mistake here? But if you are true to yourself, I don't think plagiarism is something we should worry about.
Very true. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
I have a side note question, sub question maybe. So what would be the percentage of plagiarism? So all tools, they do give a percentage, right? So even though we write it completely by our own, there are certain times we see that it's a 10% plagiarism, 11%, something like that. So what is the acceptance level we should choose? I mean, we are dependent on our machine software here, of course. But is there a human acceptance level of percentage we have?
I think that's very difficult. In fact, in our own department, when we use Turnitin, we wanted to put 15%, 14%, 18%. It's not really. But fortunately, this the software that checks for plagiarism also highlights, in yellow color, blue color, whatever, and they give the sources as well. So when we see that if you have written something like defining some term, there are not many ways to define a term. So if they highlight that, then you can overlook it. So instead of going with the percentage, I think we have to look at the document to see what is highlighted by that software as plagiarized or something that has resemblance, right? Similarity index they give. So that's a better way than going by the thing, because sometimes they might have taken a very crucial sentence. It may amount only 2% of the whole article, right? But then a crucial one that I have plagiarized, that will be a serious thing. So nobody can give the number. So one has to look at what is there. But people who are experts in the topic, when they read it, they will be able to tell. That's why we have peer review process to pick out all these things. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Vinita raised her hand, virtual hand. Sure, Vinita, go ahead.
So my question is, I often find it very hard to find the balance in the important aspects you mentioned before, that is spilling the beans in abstract, the main body, conclusion everywhere. But if I am pursuing a research which has an apparently new result, and I have to incorporate two incompatible fields of research or regimes of research, how do I organize that flow so that the third person can understand? Someone of my interest field may understand because of the writing, but someone else wouldn't understand. So it's again, if I write it in a well flow manner, then it may affect the believing index. So is there a balance, like where to cut without going into details?
Yeah, so that's a tough thing. I think I also said that when you do interdisciplinary research, so you have been trained in one area, now you are venturing into another area. So there is no shortcut really. I think if before you send a paper to a journal, it's very useful to read papers that are published in the journal in recent times or in the past. That will give you how those journals interpret various things, right? So if you are publishing, then you would definitely have some prior work or cite the reference that you are going to cite. Look at them. If you are publishing in a journal whose papers you are not citing, that's when you are venturing out of your field to another field, right? So then you have to look at other papers and learn. It's actually hard work. There is no easy way to do that. So if you have good understanding of your field as well as the other field that you're venturing into, then you would be able to do a good job, right? But there is no shortcut to it. You have to analyze how papers are written in the other field. You give enough background. Again, this play the game of Jenga, as I said. You write everything and then start taking out. That's sometimes that will also work.
Thank you, sir.